So today we're going to talk about entity framework and creating a new solution in .NET. Here I'm inside a folder. As you can see, I open my VS Code. I'm inside a folder that you're going to find on my GitHub repos, and I called it C# tutorial YouTube. Now what we're going to do today, we're going to create a new solution, and following the clean architecture pattern, we're going to create a web app, which is going to be our API layer. We're going to create a business logic layer, a data layer, which is the one that is going to contain our classes for our entities. We're going to see how to run tests. We're going to see a few examples. So let's get started. First of all, you need to have .NET installed. So if you do a .NET list SDKs, you're gonna get something like this. If you don't have any, or it says that .NET is not installed, then you need to go on the Microsoft website and install the latest .NET SDK. For this tutorial, I'm gonna use .NET 6, but most of the things you're gonna see are gonna also work for .NET 5 or .NET 3.1. Now, inside this folder, I'm going to create a new solution. So I'm going to run the command .NET new sln. So it's going to create a new solution. Now we need to add the different layers according to the clean architecture. So starting from the basic model file, it's the one going to create all of the models. So it's going to be a class lib. So we're going to do .NET new class lib, and then we're going to specify which one is going to be the output folder, and we're going to have the one called entities, or just entity maybe. So inside the entities folder, inside the entities project, it's the one in which we're going to have all of our models. Okay, it's not going to be the one that is going to contain the actual access to the database, but it's going to contain the models. The next one we need to create is the business logic one. So we're going to call this .NET new class lib -o, and we can call it application, which is the one where usually your business logic actually lives. And finally, we're going to need the API layer. So .NET new web app -o, and we can call this API because it's going to be an API project. So we created the different sections, and the next thing we need to do, as I said, we need to create a folder or a new project or a new class lib, but in this case, our class lib is going to be for the data, for the connection between the entities and the data layer project, then the database itself. I'm going to call this data layer. Okay, so now we can list our directories. We have an API, application, data layer, and entity. So the last bit we need to create, it's instead to have a test folder. Okay, but we're gonna worry about this just a second later, after we created a few items. All right, so we start from the outer layer, which is API, and we're gonna add references to the other projects. So we go inside the API folder, and now what we're gonna do, we're gonna add a reference to our business layer folder. So we're gonna do .NET add reference, and then this one is gonna be application. Okay, then we go out from this folder, we go inside the application folder, which is the business logic folder, and we add the references to the data layer and the entity folders. So we add a reference to .NET, add reference data layer. Okay, so this application can actually communicate with the database, as well as we need to have it connected to the entity folder so that we have access to our models as well. Then we go out from this directory and we go inside our data layer folder, and we connect this one, the data layer folder, with the entity. Okay, and for the last bit, we don't need to have for the last bit, the entity is like the base entity and doesn't need to be referencing anything else. Alright, so, and in here I can see that I have my different application layers, the solution file, etc. So let's open the terminal again. Just want to show you the different layers. So what we need to do now, we need to inform the solution to add all of these sections. So we have API, application, data layer, entity, so now all the projects are referenced in here. And what we're gonna need, the last bit we need is to have a new .NET project for the test entity. So we're gonna do .NET new xunit, which is the framework we're actually gonna do for tests. We're gonna call this project simply test. So we created a new test project. Okay, and now inside the test project, we need to reference, well, first of all, let's reference the solution test to the solution. And then the next bit is to go inside the test folder, so cd test. And then we're gonna reference every other section of the application to test so that we can access any point of the app through the test folder. So we are inside test, we're gonna do .NET, add reference, and then we're gonna add API, we're gonna add application, we're gonna add data layer, and we're going to add entity. All right. So what's next now? What I want to show you is how we can create a simple data layer. We're going to create a very simple data layer inside our entity section, and we are going to then generate a migration. After generating migration, we are going to apply those changes to our database, and once we apply those changes to a database, we are going to actually do a simple query on the database. I made a small mistake. When I did this API folder, I've actually used the web app template rather than the one I wanted to actually use, which is a web API project. So I'm going to delete. If you followed along, just follow my steps, otherwise just create a new web API directly. Everything else stays the same. So move to trash. So I'm going to create .NET new web API -n API as a okay, so I have my new API. You can see I have a controller. Alright, so I'm gonna add .NET sln add API. So my API project has been added, and now what I have to do is to go into API and then do .NET add reference to the application project, and then go into the test folder and add a reference to API, which is already there. So because actually points to the CS proj file, and everything should be right now. So these references, because they point to the API CS proj file, they should be everything okay. Go ahead. I want to show you which one are the extensions that I am using to develop these applications in VS Code. So I'm going to make this a bit larger. So the first one I use is .NET Text Explorer, which essentially is a plugin that allows us to run tests really simple from VS Code itself. It's going to give us some commands on the command line, and it's quite handy to have. Then I use the second one I use is the .NET install tool for extension authors. This one I use it because helps me with development. Okay, it's not necessary to have for the purpose of this project. Then I have, this is a must to have, which is the C# extension from Microsoft called Omnisharp. You can see this little icon in here. Then I use this other one, C# extensions, which has some features such as adding new C# classes. So it's gonna, when I right click on a folder and then creates a new file, it's going to create this file with the correct namespace, as well as creating interfaces, can do some nice things. Then I like to use the sort using, because where I work we actually like to put the usings in a certain order, so I use this one. Other extensions related to .NET, let's have a look. Oh well, Nougat Gallery, this one is totally required. It makes easier to install packages. I'm gonna make use of it. It's not mandatory to have, you can always run the commands from the command line, but this one is a visual UI to install different versions of the packages. And I'm gonna use this one, Sqlite, because I'm gonna make the tests with Sqlite. And I think that's everything. That's some of the commands we can run in the command line with the .NET. So .NET --info is gonna give us the information about the different .NET SDKs runtimes that we have installed, our operating system, etc. We can have, if we need to use the help command, is simply .NET-H, and it's gonna give you the list of commands that you can create. For example, you can we already use some of these, like add, new, sln. So this one, the one that we actually used. Some of these are run automatically, like restore, remove. Nougat, we're going to use the extension, which is the one I've shown you. Then once you have a project, you can actually do things such as watch. So if I go inside my API folder, cd API, I can run the .NET watch, and this is going to start, is going to build the project, and it's gonna start the API as well as watch our API. Now this is because this is actually asking me my password to add the certificate. Okay, but if so what are these URLs? The URL is 7280 because this is .NET 6. However, if we actually open launch settings.json, you can actually read what are those URLs. I'm gonna put them back to 5001 and 5000 because these are the values that used to be before the one I'm accustomed to. So I just prefer to use those. So what I can do is to go into the terminal okay, for some reason I'm not able to kill the process. So cd API, and actually what we can do, we can actually exclude the settings from running in HTTPS. So this, if you open your program.cs, there is this use HTTPS redirection. You can just comment this out. And in here we have a simple weather forecast, which is the a controller that is predefined in our system. So if we open the controllers, we can see this terminal with and as you can see it uses a few things. So first of all, if you use .NET 5, you can see that here it's missing the brackets. Usually the namespace goes with a pair of brackets inside, and then everything else. In .NET 6 this has been removed. You can just declare the namespace at the top of the file and doesn't need to wrap anything. Now this one says it's an API controller, meaning that it's going to provide verbs like HTTP GET, POST, etc. This one is the URL where this controller is going to be taken, and as you can see the route is controller, so the name of the controller is going to be the URL / weather forecast in this case. And controller base, it actually comes from ESP.NET Core MVC, and it gives you things like responding with 204 bad requests and all of those comments, So if you go back to Firefox, you can actually see how the get that we do is a get on weather forecast. All right. So if we go back in our terminal and we create a new C# class, this is from the extension I showed you before, and we create a new simple endpoint C# class. Okay, this has been created according to the old style, so I'm gonna API controllers, and now simple endpoint extends controller base. So for some reason we call it simple endpoint controller. Let's restart Omnisharp. That sometimes hangs. Okay, controller base. And we're gonna use I press the control or command dot, and I'm gonna do use Microsoft ESP.NET Core MVC. and I'm gonna do some annotations on this one. So exactly like in this, we're gonna say it's an API controller, and the route to access is going to be the controller name, and we're gonna add a simple method. So essentially all we want to do in here is to have a method where we're gonna do a get. Alright, so let's add a constructor, so generate a constructor, and then we're gonna add a public, and we're gonna return a string, and the method name is gonna be hit me, simply because we're gonna hit this method. We're gonna say the route is gonna be /hello. The quotes that you actually should be using are double quotes. And here we're gonna return hello from hit me. Alright, so if we do a watch again, okay, so we have our controller. We're gonna put http get hello. So the final route is gonna be a route with the controller name and then get hello, and it's gonna return hello hit from hit me. Okay, so let's go back to the browser. This is the Swagger UI, so we get endpoint hello, try it out, execute, and the response is gonna be hello from hit me. Alright, let's go back to our controller, and let's do something slightly more interesting. Now let's do something slightly more interesting. What we are going to do now, it is to connect our API, our project, with Sqlite. So to do this, we are going to need to install a few items inside our API, inside our projects. So let's open the Nougat Gallery. So we open the Nougat Gallery from the command line, and the first thing we're gonna look for is the Microsoft entity co Sqlite. So we go here, paste, and we filter it, and we're gonna find the Sqlite. This one has to be installed inside our data layer project, because data layer is the responsible for the is the one responsible for accessing the database directly. Okay, so we're gonna install it. It's gonna execute some commands at the bottom, and then we can close the terminal when it finishes. Alright, now moving on, inside our API project, instead what we need to install is the Entity Microsoft Entity Framework, but we need to install the design package. Alright, so we search for Entity Framework or design, which is this first one in here, and we install it inside our API project. And now once this is done, we can actually close this window. And for now, we added all the projects that we need. Now, the next bit to do is to inform where this database lives. So as you can see, inside our project, we have an appsettings.json and appsettings.development.json. Now, inside this block, okay, inside this outer block, we're gonna add a new section. This is JSON format. So we can have connection strings, and inside these connection strings, we're gonna add a default connection, and we're gonna specify a data source for Sqlite. So this one is gonna be, the stream format is gonna be data, and then source is gonna be equal to the name of the database. And in this case, I'm gonna call it simply database.db. Okay, and this is we're gonna read this string from our program.cs, and we're going to inform it about the fact that we actually want to connect using this string to create this database. The database is going to be created for us by the entity framework, and the other thing that is going to happen is that we're going to have a data context that contains all of those items. So we're going to create a model inside our entity class, inside our entity model. I would say the first thing we want to do, as you can see, our templates have created some extra items like class 1 in each one of those. So just go ahead and delete those. Okay, so we just delete class 1. Just delete those, so we have a nice clean state. So inside the entity project, we're gonna add a new class. We're gonna call this class, for example, a simple model. Let's call it person. Okay, it's a classic name. So a person has a we can use a public. Actually, if you type prop and then tab, it's gonna give you some items predefined for you. GUID, and then we're gonna call it ID. Then prop string name prop. Then we're gonna have string surname. What we're getting in here, it's this underline because it's a non-nullable value. And this one is coming from .NET 6 because there is this nullable item in here. Because these are simple examples, I'm gonna remove it for the time being, otherwise you have to explicitly either say that this one is required, or you're gonna say that these are not required. In this case, I'm gonna say that they are not nullable. So I'm gonna remove this section from my CSproj file. And then, as you can see, the warning goes away. Okay, so we created our base class. Now, inside the data layer, we're gonna create a new file, which is going to be our data context. So we create this called data context, and this data context file is going to extend the DB context coming from, you can see the autocomplete Microsoft Entity Framework Co. Okay, so this one has been added to the usings. We have Microsoft Entity Framework Co. And inside this one, we need to create a constructor, and as you can see, has created the constructor with database context options from Entity Framework Co, and extends the base class, which is DB context. Okay, here we don't have to do anything else. We need to add a our DB set, and the DB set in this case is the name of the model we create inside entity. So as you can see, auto-completes with entity, and we're gonna call this people, and we have a get and a set for it. So you can see here we have our entity. Here essentially we are saying this one is not nullable. The problem is the same as before, is because of this warning. You can declare it as nullable or not. We simply say, oh, you can also say to the to the compiler that you know what you're doing. However, I'm just gonna remove this for the time being. All right, now the next. Now, so we have the person, we have our data context, and then what we need to do, we need to go on our startup class, and we need to add the DB context. So in here, we have the services. Okay, so what we're gonna add, these things are a little bit different from .NET 5 to .NET 6, but essentially builder.services .add DB context. Okay, this one is from AF, and we're gonna say this one is gonna be the data context coming from data layer, and this one takes a lambda expression. So we're gonna pass in the options, and those options are gonna be options.use Sqlite from Entity Framework Co. And what we're gonna do here, we need to get the configs connection string in here. So we're gonna do builder.configuration.get connection string, and then in here we're gonna specify which one is the name of the connection string that we used, which is exactly, we need to exactly write this one, default connection. Okay, so we created our Sqlite, and our Sqlite, make sure that we have this entity inside it. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna go inside the data layer project, and we're gonna add our initial migration. So we're gonna do .NET EF migrations, add, and then we're gonna specify a name for our migration. In this case, I'm gonna call it initial, because it's the initial migration. And we're gonna give the startup project to be /API. It's gonna create a build. Okay, it's telling me that I should upgrade the tool, because maybe I installed .NET 6 but I didn't upgrade all the tools. I'm gonna do this later. However, let's have a look at what happened. Inside the data layer, I have this new initial, and inside here there are a couple of files that you should never create or edit manually. These have to be used by the SDK, and this says to the configuration how this one is going to be created. So we have a table named people, we have the columns that are going to be ID, name and surname, and the primary key is primary key people. It is the ID column of this table. All of these, because I'm using Sqlite, are going to be of type text. Alright, the next bit I want to do, I want to have, as you can see, I yet don't have anything inside here with our database. So we're going to run a .NET EF database update -s for startup project, and again it's going to be the API folder. Now it's going to give me the same warning as before. And now, as you can see, I have this database.db folder in here that has just been created. So now with that Sqlite extension, I can open the command palette and do Sqlite open database. It's going to look for the database, and in here you can see that I have my table created in here. Okay, so what can we do now? Now what we can do is to go, we can actually close this, we don't care anymore. What we can do now, we can go inside, actually, first of all, we can actually delete these two controllers because we actually don't care about those. So let's create a new class. We're gonna call this people controller. Okay, and they're gonna be essentially the same. We're gonna use a controller base exactly as we did before. Coming from esp.NET Core. And then we're gonna have a route coming from esp.NET Core MVC routing. Actually, let's remove all of those unnecessary usings so that this one it's the route is gonna be as before controller name. Alright, then we can actually generate the constructor, and now we're gonna use some dependency injection for this. So the dependency injection is a feature from EF. So sorry, not data layer, data context coming from data layer. And now this one is gonna be a private read-only data context. And then in the constructor, we're gonna specify the data context is equal to data context. Okay, we can actually underscore okay. I made the font a little bit larger so that it's easier to read. And then the next bit is going to be to have a method. So we're gonna have a method to read the list of people. So here we're not going to return a string anymore, we're going to return a task with a list of people. Yeah, which I called person. Alright, so how we're going to return this list of people? We're going to take the data context dot people dot we can make this one actually async method so that we can actually use the controller method, and then we can have a second method which is going to be http post. Okay, and this one is going to be public async task boolean just to return if it's add person. And this one, what is gonna do? This one is in is an HTTP post, so we need to actually send. We actually have to send those people in. Okay, so how we can actually do this? And here you can see the comments that get created every time, by the way. HTTP post method that is gonna simply hit this controller, and this one is gonna receive a person, and it's simply gonna do data context dot people dot add person. Of course, this is not the way you do it in real life. And then we're gonna do data context dot save changes async. And the last bit we're gonna do is return true, assuming that everything went well. Alright, now we have these two items, post and list. So what we can do, we can open the terminal and we can actually run .NET watch once more. We need to be inside the API project, and we can run our .NET watch command, and I should actually open back our Swagger UI. Okay, so we can actually try and execute. As you can see, it's empty. We have a post, and we can actually try it out. So we're gonna give a name. I'm gonna give my name. Execute. Return true. So now if we execute this one once more, as you can see, my ID has been created for me directly from the database. And the next bit we can actually do is to add, for example, the usual Bob Doe. And again, return true. We can add John Smith. Execute, return true once more. Execute. In the get, we're gonna see all of these guys popping up in our database. So let's stop the executions in here once more. And what is the next thing we want to do? The next thing I want to do in here, I said I wanted to get rid of these two. So delete these two items. And the next thing I want to do in here is actually make use of the test folder. All right. So what I'm gonna do, inside the test folder here I have XUnit, which I'm gonna show you very simply how this one work. So XUnit is an entity framework. It's a framework for .NET to is a framework. Now here I can click run test, and it's gonna compile, it's gonna do some things, and in the end it's gonna say, is it true? Yes, it's true. Is 3, well, you got the gist. Now this unit test number 1, we can simply delete it, and we're gonna add a new folder, and we're gonna call it data layer, or we can simply call it it's very hard to name things. Let's call it test 01 add person. Okay, now inside here we're gonna create a new C# class. Gonna call it add person. Now this one is gonna check that we are actually adding people. Okay, so for this one I'm actually gonna use another project which I'm going to install with I'm actually gonna install it with Nougat. Okay, so we add a constructor in here, and inside this constructor, exactly like we did before, we're gonna add a data context. And the data context is data context. Then here we have a private read-only data context, and then we assign our data context to data context. And now we're gonna add a first test. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna have a fact, which is an annotation coming from xunit, and then we're gonna have our public void. We're gonna call it test add person. Now in this case, what is actually gonna happen is that we're actually going to modify our item, and we're gonna have the so we're gonna create a person. So we're gonna have a var new person equal new person coming from entity, and this one is gonna have an ID of GUID.new GUID. Name is gonna be Bob. Surname is gonna be what we can do, we can actually interpolate a string. So we're actually gonna go this $, and then gonna add the surname is gonna be a GUID. And then I'm gonna do context, data context dot people dot actually I can do data context dot add well, actually I'm not understanding why this is not. So this one should work exactly the same way. I'm probably doing some mistake. It's because in our test project I need to have the same libraries that I've installed in here or that I've installed in here. Okay, so we're gonna need these two packages to be added. So let's open the Nougat Gallery. So entity framework call is going to be installed inside our test. Then we're going to need the design. Inside test. Then I'm gonna install just all the ones I'm planning to use. Proxies in test. And then of course we're gonna need Sqlite. And there is another one that I'm not sure if I'm going to make use of it, but it's called EF Core Test Support. This one is essentially an extension that helps us to make tests in an easy way. For example, this person I could create, rather than referring to the real database, I can create an in-memory SQLite database, and this library makes this process quite easy. So I'm going to install it. So we have this new @person, and now everything works okay. So, and simply what I can do, I can actually find data context dot save changes, and then I can retrieve the data context dot people dot where p dot id is equal to new person dot id. Sorry, this one should be an equals comparison dot first or default async, and we need to make this function async, and we can actually await. Now this person, we should have the name Bob, so we should say assert dot equal Bob p dot name. Okay, this is complaining because it could be null. If null, of course the test should fail. Run the test. Okay, the reason why we are getting this this error is because this data context actually doesn't have access to the location of the layer. So what I'm gonna do, there are a few ways to fix it, but because this way of doing this is actually not the best way, since it's going to actually modify, it would modify the real database. So as you can see, I still have the 3 people that I created. I don't want this to add more people inside it. What I can actually do, I can modify this test a little bit, and what I can actually do, I can have this using that library that I installed, the EF tools. So var options is equal to Sqlite in memory dot create options, and now here we need to specify the data context. Okay, the next bit we're gonna have a using. The reason why here we're gonna use a using is because we're gonna create a context, and the context is going to be destroyed automatically once this run. So our context is equal to new data context, and here we're gonna have the options provided by the library. Then inside this using block, we are gonna move all of this. So here we have the new person. Instead of the context, we need to use the context that we've just created. So, and also in here, let's run it and then we discuss a little bit more about it. Oh, of course, I didn't remove the original reference in here, so let's get rid of all of this. So let's have a look at what's the error. Okay, so the reason why we get this error, it's because the context is new. Therefore, no migration has been created. So what we should do, we should say context.database.ensure created. So this is going to make sure that the database is going to actually be created and there is a table available for our test to run. And as you can see, we actually created our Bob and with our name. Now here I'm following a precise pattern when I create tests. So the first section here, where up to here, I'm actually it's called setup of the test. Then the second section, actually up to here, is the setup of the test. This whole block in which I create the options, I have a context, I make sure the database is created, I add the person to the database. It's where I'm actually going to add stuff to it. Alright, then here, this one is my attempt, so I'm gonna do a certain operation. And the last one, it's where I'm gonna verify my assertion. Okay, so this one is actually coming from my, I'm going to verify that my theory is verified. Okay, and that's all. So now let's have a recap of what we have explored today. So first of all, we set up a framework using the clean architecture. So we created all of these folders in here using the with one solution. We created an API, an application for our business logic, the data layer, which is responsible for doing things and communicating with the database, an entity, which is where all of our models and is the center of our application. And the last bit is we have a test folder so that everything we do can actually be tested. So here we've shown how to create a controller. So we added a couple of example controllers and then we created a get and post controller. In here in the launch settings, I created this HTTPS server, which on the next bit I'm going to show how to actually add this to the certificate so you can actually access without warnings. We have a CSproj file which uses net6. I've installed .NET EF Design 6 Then in the development.json, I've added this connection string to use the database.json. Actually, this name can be anything. And I'm actually consuming this inside the program.cs file, in which I add a database context, and I provide a connection string saying use the connection string with name default connection. We removed the HTTPS redirection so that I was able to actually use the normal way through the app. And then we have the weather. This file here, we can actually get rid of it. It's part of the example. Now moving down to the application layer, we haven't used it yet. It's where the logic is gonna be. And for example, in the next one, we're gonna see how the controllers is going to move inside here using something called the CQRS pattern. We're gonna see what this is next time. We're gonna move all of this inside the application layer. Then we have the data layer. The data layer contains migrations which are automatically generated by our system. We have a data context which contains the tables and can actually contain how to create relationships between tables with the EF. And we have a data layer, and this data layer uses Sqlite because it's the database of choice for this simple project. And then we have the entity, which doesn't have any dependencies and is the central bit. And finally, we have our test, which uses XUnit. So that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed. If you didn't understand something, maybe add a comment below. And if you like these videos and you want to see more, please consider to subscribe, leave comments. Anything is appreciated. Thank you very much. See you next time.